Shalom. This week we're reading Parashat Ki Tisa, and in chapter 32 we read about the terrible debacle of the golden calf. A very hard subject to discuss, the golden calf, and we've talked about it before. We learn about it. We know that it's a sin of such tremendous ramifications that literally we're still reeling from it today, even though we also know that on a deep level the sin of the Jewish people wasn't really about idolatry. That was the angle of the mixed multitude who were pushing for this event to happen. But the sin of the Jewish people was really on a finer point. It was really kind of about having something to focus on. It was very much connected with the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu, that Moses was late coming down, and the people felt themselves to be in some sort of a vacuum. They had a dearth of leadership. They needed something tangible, maybe something that they could just wrap their minds around. And of course, that is indicative of the fact that the slave mentality was still something that was very much a part of their psyche. They really weren't ready yet. They really didn't see the spin. They didn't have the complete connection yet. They weren't really ready yet to become everything they would become. And Moshe, he took this whole thing very personally. It really was a very personal connection between Moshe's being late and the reaction of the people being stirred on by the real idolatrous intent of the mixed multitude. Again, this sin being so fine and so specific as far as some sort of go-between, some sort of intermediary, some sort of hierarchy, so that the people would not be able to just concentrate on the total oneness of Hashem. And it was all a terrible mistake. And what I really want to focus on now is the role that Moshe played in diffusing the anger of Hashem, and really what it means, and really what we can see from some of the beautiful midrashim. We understand from this whole episode the incredible relationship between Moshe and his people, and the extent that he was willing to go for his people, and what it really means for a leader to be totally connected to his people. The first thing that happened here is that Hashem said to Moshe, in verse 7 of chapter 32, Hashem spoke to Moshe and he said, "Go, descend, lech, raid. Go and descend, for your people that you brought up from the land of Egypt have become corrupt." And on these words, lech, raid, you go, as it were, and descend, you go down, our sages tell us that Hashem was really kind of saying to Moshe, you go down in your spiritual stature. Decrease in your own greatness, because a leader is really only as great as his people. And it's like Hashem was saying to Moshe, I only made you great for the sake of the Jewish people, but now that they've sinned, so then you also, why do you have to have any greatness? Moses became very weakened from this spiritually. And then Hashem said, now just hold off, like leave me be, and I'm going to destroy them. And Moshe realized, you know what? This is totally up to me. This is all up to me. And the parable that the sages give is to a king who was very angry with his child, and he started smacking him, and he was really giving it to him really rough, and there was a loved one sitting there, and he was afraid to say anything. And then the king said, you know, if it wouldn't be for you sitting here, I don't know what I would do to this boy. And then the loved one said, wow, it really is up to me. So he came and rescued him. And so too Moshe realized, this is really all up to my prayer. And there's a very beautiful statement made by one Rabbi Barachia in the name of Rabbi Levi in the Midrash. He says, you know what this is likened unto? The parable is, there was a king who had a vineyard, and he gave over the vineyard to be cultivated by a tenant farmer. So when the wine that the tenant made was good, so then the king would say, look how good my wine is, the wine that my vineyard produces. And when the wine was bad, the king would say, look at the terrible wine that my tenant makes. So the farmer said to the king, sir, O king, the wine is your wine. When it's good wine, it's yours. And when it's bad wine, it's also yours. So also, here we find the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He Himself, said to Moshe, he said, in the beginning of their relationship, he said, now I'm going to send you. He said, now go, and I will send you to Paro, and you should take out my people, the children of Israel. And now that they did what they did with the golden calf, what do we find in the Torah? That Hashem said, Lech, raid, go and descend, for your people have become corrupt. And Moshe said before the Holy One, blessed be He, Ribbono Shel Olam, Master of the Universe, when they sin, they're yours. And when they're good, they're yours. They're always yours. they are your nation and your inheritance, as the Torah states. And as Rabbi Simon said, he did not budge from there, from heaping upon them this affection and from showing Hashem how he himself had promised that they would always be his people, until indeed God again called them his people. As the verse states, that God, Hashem, was reconciled. He regretted the decree that he was going to do against his people. So Moshe, as we know, as we read about here further on in the chapter, we find that he says, "And now, if you would but forgive their sin, but if not, erase me now from your book that you have written." And we know that the whole idea here is that the tremendous self-sacrifice, the tremendous willingness for Moshe to literally to die, to never have been, to sacrifice himself for his people, it's totally beyond all proportion of anything that we recognize in any other leadership. And we understand the tremendous bond that Moshe felt with his people. And I think that that is expressed very beautifully by another thought that we find here on these verses. As the Midrash explains, there's an incredible verse here that I think we don't know even what to do with it. We don't know how to read this verse. The verse states, Hashem is saying, as Moshe is praying to God, we find this verse, it's verse 10, "And now," Hashem says, "desist from me." Literally, leave me be. Let my anger flare up against them, and I shall annihilate them. And then I shall make you into a great nation. What does this mean? Hashem is, as it were, asking Moshe's leave, asking his permission. Leave me be. Let me have a minute alone with them, and I'll take care of them. We have an amazing midrash. Amar Rabbi Elazar, the famous Rabbi Elazar said, apparently he felt the same way that we do when we see this verse. He said, if it wouldn't be for the fact that this verse states these words explicitly, we would never be able to be such a thing. We would never be able to say such a thing. What an incredible expression, he says. He says, I can't believe this verse. He says, if it wouldn't be for the fact that the Torah itself says such a thing, we would never be able to say such a thing on our own. We would never be so bold as to venture forth the idea that this verse is expressing, which is that Moshe, the verse is coming to teach us that Moshe, as it were, grabbed God like a person who would grab his friend by his garment and said, Master of the universe, I'm not letting you go. I'm not letting you budge from here until you forgive your people. This is just such an unbelievable thing. Of course, God doesn't have a robe that Moshe could grab the corner of. And the parable that our sages are telling us is that this was so powerful, this scene, that Moshe was so insistent that he was willing to lay down everything, to risk it all, to grab God, as it were. How many people are that close to God? How many people have that kind of a relationship that they could grab him, as it were, and risk it all and know that they would be successful? And then the Midrash continues and tells us about these words that God said, I'm going to make you into a great nation. The same Rabbi Elazar continues and says, Moshe said before the Holy One, blessed be He, Master of the universe, a three-legged stool, if it can't stand when you're angry, if it won't bear your anger, how much less would a one-legged chair be able to survive before you? And of course he's referring to the pact that God made with the three forefathers, the promise that he made for their sake to their children. And he's saying, what, you're going to start all over with me? And not only that, Moshe said, but I'm going to be embarrassed. I'm going to be mortified before my forefathers, because they're going to say, you were the leader, you were responsible for them, and it was up to you to beseech mercy for them. And the whole relationship between Moshe and the Jewish people is this relationship of seeking mercy, always looking for their betterment, always seeing the good in them, and always being able to elevate that and forego their foibles, and even to convince God himself to grab God by his garment, as it were, by his corner, and say, figuratively of course, and say, I'm not budging from here until you exercise mercy for your people. And we look around us today at our so-called leaders in every sphere, and we realize how much we're missing. We realize what that true relationship is supposed to be, what kind of life and nurturing it really contains. And Moshe, not only was he willing to lay down his life for his people, not only was he ready to sacrifice himself, but he wouldn't budge until his people had life, until he knew that they were living their lives to the fullest. And that means that they too would have their fullest connection with God. And it wasn't enough for him, any offer that was made to him to start all over again. Life meant nothing to him whatsoever. It was not worth living without his people, and without seeing to it, and without guaranteeing, at whatever it would cost him, that his people would have the fullest life. And that, of course, is what true leadership is all about. And that's why, even though the Torah is Torat Hashem, the Torah is the Torah of God, we find this beautiful verse in Malachi that tells us that God says, remember the Torah of Moshe, my servant, because he was willing to sacrifice it all for the Torah. So the Torah is called on his name. Just as he was willing to sacrifice it all for his own people, so also they are called the people of Moshe, not only the people of God. And what we see from here is that the real connection between Moshe, between a leader and the people, is on such a soul level. It's on a level of the value of every moment of life itself. And true leadership, true connection, goes way beyond self-sacrifice, goes way beyond dedication. It gets to the point where life is not worth living, where it has no significance and no value whatsoever if it can't be for the elevation and for the forgiveness, for the mercy for his precious people.